Welcome to another episode of The Council. I'm your host, Jonathan Rego, and today I have with me a very interesting gentleman. We've met for the first time today, but we've kind of looked into each other's backgrounds to try and understand and get context for this interview. Mr. Roy Webber, a gentleman who has seen so many sports events and has seen the back end of it, the front end of it, everything end to end. It's an absolute pleasure and an honor to sit with you here, Mr. Webber.
Pleasure to be here.
For the purpose of our viewers and our listeners, could you give us a brief outlook into what your professional career has been thus far?
Sure. Well, the Works is now in its 30th year. Probably 21 years of that is sport specific.
Right.
So we've built relationships with the world's biggest federations over that period of time. For instance, we've did with the last 3 World Cups for FIFA.
Right.
We're on our 3rd Women's World Cup. We've worked with World Volleyball Championships, World Basketball Championships, World Hockey, All European Rugby, World Baseball, Cricket. So a lot of it.
There's a lot. There's almost no sport that you haven't touched.
Yeah, and I think what if we are famous for something, it's because we are probably the best police of a brand.
Right.
So, you know, they come to us because it's very important that the brand is protected, and when a local organising committee wants to do something that they shouldn't be doing, they can't do it. So this is what happened in the early days working with the World Hockey Federation and with FIBA, because in most cases these federations are a small team of people running the marketing and brand department, and so that the initial logo is created, and then it goes to a local organising committee somewhere, and the event could be a completely different event. There's no coordination, there's no consistency. So that's where we've come in, and we've put FIBA and volleyball in that zone now, so they know everything is correct, and you follow a plan that you see it through. So nobody can mess with the brand. It's digitally or in print.
Right. So it's interesting that you mentioned that you police the brand, and and the reason you do that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is because there's so much thought that goes and so much depth of thought that goes into building a brand. If I were to ask you 2 elements that are critical in the process of designing a brand, so you get the mandate to do it, from there to actually designing the final logo, the brand, and then presenting it to the client or the association. What are 2 of the most important elements that need to be thought of during that process?
Okay, so 2 sorts of brands. One is for an event that could be a one-off event, so there's no longevity to it, so you can have a bit of fun with that. The other thing is if you're creating a brand for a major event, or let's say for instance, what I would use as the best example, unfortunately we didn't do it, I would love to have done it, is the Champions League, because the Champions League brand now, there's so much consistency. They tweak it every 3 years, but it's just a tweak.
Right.
So, for instance, if you hear the theme music, even a part of the theme music, you know that's the Champions League.
You know it's Champions League. Exactly.
If you see the slightest part of it, you know exactly what it is. So, and not just the branding, but the format of that competition.
Right.
Everybody's following the Champions League format now because it maximises the most amount of money.
Right.
And it's now taken over the world of football. For instance, in the UK, the FA Cup, which used to be the thing everybody wanted to win, it's way down the list now.
Absolutely.
If you don't finish in the top 4 and you're not in the Champions League, it's considered to be a bad season. So they've created something very, very special, and the whole world is following it now.
Right.
So the 2 sorts of brand, one is longevity, and then one is a short term. But for instance, take a World Cup for instance, so FIFA would go out to 8 different agencies. They have a process where they have 8 preferred suppliers, and every 3 years they review that. We're in those 8, so we all have to tender. We have to come up with 3 concepts, and it's based around the logo has to follow the shape of the World Cup. So you're working with those realms, and it has to reflect the culture of the host nation. So they're the 2 things. So we come up with 3 concepts, and if you're lucky enough to get chosen, they pick one, and then we work with them to develop it. So the process is the logo, and then what we call a secondary look. And it's where that logo sits and lives, and it gives you somewhere else to go when you're doing the fan zone, the host cities, corporate entertainment. You have to have this secondary look.
Right.
And so once you've created that, and we create all those elements for them, we then put it into what we call a lookbook, a style guide, and then that goes out to everybody, so you can't mess with it. And there's lots of elements that flow from that. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds down to a car park pass. It has to be all on brand. And then you go into all your social media, then the broadcast, everything has to follow on brand, and that's what we do.
Right. I can imagine that the bouquet of solutions that you provide in that lookbook has increased now because, like we discussed before the interview, you were talking about the importance of having everything now make sure it's social, it can be shared on social media, for instance.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah. It has to work on social media.
Exactly. So I want to take up on something that you mentioned there, which is you look at the entire process from start to end, and you make sure that you cover every step of that way. One of the things that struck me when talking about brands and building brands, you've worked with a lot of events in developing countries. Now, one of the things with developing countries, and it happens to a certain extent in certain developed countries as well, is that there are certain sensibilities in that country, whether it is the imagery that you use, whether it's the color you use, whether it's the words that you put together. How do you go about, and one thing we all know is that a lot of what happens in sport is very last minute. You know, you get the mandate very too close to the event, or you've got to turn this around in 15 days. So how do you balance between making sure you deliver something on time, but at the same time taking into account the sensibilities and the culture of that particular place?
Well, a lot of that comes from working with the local organising committee. They play a major part in it now, so obviously with FIFA and a local organising committee, you know what, we get our firm brief from working with that. So like you were saying earlier on about something going terribly wrong, it wouldn't happen.
Right.
Because it wouldn't be allowed to happen with the process that we go through.
Okay.
But everything, yeah, lots of last minute work, you just have to deal with it, which we do. It's happening now, we're working on the World Cup, Women's World Cup in Paris 2019, and there's lots of last minute changes happening.
I totally can imagine, especially.
Yes.
Right.
Especially in places like Russia, where the influence changes from week to week.
Right. Do you have any, I'm going to probably probe you a little and say, do you have any interesting anecdotes that you want to share that of your experience with having received something at the very last minute, but managing to pull it off to the satisfaction and the quality of work that you guys like?
Again, Russia's a good example.
Okay.
Again, we didn't actually do the branding for Russia. We came second in the exercise. But every year they have, leading up to the World Cup, they have the Federation Cup, which is basically a trial for the World Cup. And the assets that were created didn't work. So it was a disaster. So FIFA took it away and gave it all to us and said, rework this at very short notice. Yeah. So you're looking at 12 stadiums and then one stadium for the final, and all the branding across every application and tickets. And we did all the branding for the stadia, all went off to print. And then they found out that in certain places there were cameras that were going to be blocking out certain elements that were important, so we had to go back at the very last minute, change all the branding for all the stadia and put it. So it's quite traumatic, but it gets done. It's not so much us, it's the guys printing it at the other end that have the major problem. Yeah, we're way down the end of that line though, so it gets quite close.
Got it. So I want to talk to you more about your trip to India now and the partnership that you've gotten into. So your agency has gotten into a partnership with the Social Street. As a matter of fact, we're shooting in their beautiful office today. What are some of the reasons you decided to go ahead with Social Street in India? Because there are older agencies. Some could argue there are more experienced agencies in terms of the amount of work that they've done. But as somebody who's been in the sports industry for several decades, there's a reason you've chosen this agency. So what are some of the thoughts that went into partnering with Social Street? Okay,
I'll tell you how it came about. We have a mutual friend, a guy called Navneet Sharma, a really lovely man. He's very important in the world of cricket, and I did a presentation to them in Dubai. He loved our work, and he said, you should meet my friend in India, Mandeep. So Mandeep was travelling, so I met with him in Paris. We had dinner, and we pretty well did the deal over dinner, because the missing link that we have, they have it all here in Social Street, and they were wanting to go into sport. We had a great portfolio for sport. Again, no disrespect, whether India is ready to go into the detail of the things we do, that's another discussion, but I think it's a fantastic starting point. And so we decided to go as a partnership. Well, that's developed into, the reason I'm here today is we're going to sign the legal entity for a legal partnership within India. So, and now since Naveen's been on board, some exciting things coming through. So we're really up for this. It's exciting. I'm happy to come out here. I love coming out here. And yeah, and it's a challenge. Like you're talking about the boat competition. That's a massive challenge.
Right. So that's my next question actually. You've worked with obviously the most popular sport in the world, which is football. Yeah. But at the same time, you work. I, from what I understand, before we started this interview, you also like working with certain challenges, which is to bring up and coming sports. So in the case of the boat league that you guys are going to sign on and execute, what are some of the lessons you can take from football, which is world over, everybody understands the game, like you said about Champions League, the moment you play the music, you know it's a Champions League. Similarly, the moment you see your ball, you know you want to kick it. Yes. You know. So what are some of the lessons you can take from a popular sport like football and then bring them on to sports like volleyball, which is less popular, or even, for example, the boat league that you guys are going to be doing?
Well, from our point of view, it'll be creating a brand, and a consistent brand that everybody knows and gets to know. The major part will be with Social Street and the social media aspect of it, bringing it to the masses through social media. Right. So we can make it look great, we can do some great promotional movies, that's what we will do, but working hand in hand, it will be a big part down to the social media side. Right. But a small example of a brand, we started working with European rugby, which is very popular. It was called ERC, European Rugby, and it's very old school. We call old school in the UK. Right. And having worked with them for 2 or 3 years, we realised that they had 3 cup competitions, but their premier competition was called the Heineken Cup, because Heineken was the main sponsor. But you would not even know that the federation existed, because everything was based around Heineken. So we said to them, you should change this. So you should get equal billing. You are the federation. Right. So everywhere we see it, ERC is as clear as Heineken. Right. And then we said to them, you should reevaluate your brand based on numbers of people that come to see your sport and the number of people that watch it on TV, which was an interesting exercise. So that was done, and the consequence of reevaluating their brand based on those facts, they were enabled to get £11 million a year more, some from Heineken and some from Sky TV, the sponsors. So it's quite interesting that, that you know, you don't know what you have until you evaluate it. So, and now they've moved on. They're no longer ERC. They're now called EPCR, and they've restructured their competition like the Champions League. And yeah, it seems it's going all okay for them now. Got it.
Thanks for your time, Roy. It's an absolute pleasure having you here. We hope this is not the last time you're here, and considering the work that you're going to be doing now with the Boat League, we hope to see you more and have you on the console once again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roy.
Thank you.